for people with accessibility challenges, which are not. And we went in adapting this list that we had done and adding an accessibility framework. We then were brainstorming of trying a stock taking survey and just what is the awareness among ICANN org staff. We thought that would be useful because we could provide a baseline. And so we worked to create a survey which was not technology focused, it's more on staff focused of what do staff know about accessibility issues? Do they have members of their team who are people with disabilities? What kind of work, if originally in the meetings applications, there wasn't any issue, there wasn't a comments, oh, do you need to be in a closer hotel? Do you need this? So the idea of accessibility just wasn't on people's mindset. And it just wasn't on things that they were looking at when they were looking at meetings and the setups. And so that is some of the issues that we try to bring to people's mind, and in both in this stock taking survey. Next slide. So we finalized the survey in 2015, and we presented it to the human resource staff who were in charge of those issues. And we had a bunch of discussions, but going back to the awareness issue is that they were saying, oh, we were not aware of any of these issues beforehand. And so that's why it was slow going. And it was just like, well, thank you for letting us know. We were just no one in our staff knows about any of these issues. So they had a hard time in filling out the survey because they had no knowledge of what was in other areas of the organization. And those were some of the comments that they gave us, is not that they were against it, it's just that because they had no awareness, they didn't want to fill out the survey incorrectly because they had no idea. So that started us on this path of how do we get an increased knowledge of accessibility? How do we get more resources? And the answer showed us that it wasn't that there was a lack of concern on accessibility issues, it's just the lack of awareness, and that there was a lot of training that needed to be done and making people aware of what it is that people would require, what do we need to do, and then sort of not only in the HR area, but also in the technology front to increase awareness. Next slide. And some of our other issues is we were looking at, this small team was doing, was how do we create a series of best practices on accessibility issues? Some of this led up to the conferencing software. Others, like when you're using a conferencing software, how do you make sure things are accessible to people with screen readers? So some of these, not in the sharing of the slides, but maybe posting on chat, linking to the agenda, adding presentations to the agenda, all different ways of putting notes when we were still using Adobe Connect, what part is accessible, the captioning parts, other things, how is chat accessible, is chat, other things. So we looked at the range of those issues, and then we worked with staff to get those incorporated. And I know the IT meeting staff were very helpful in that area, and Sarah's team, Mark's team, Josh, when he was working there, were all very helpful in working with us and learning how to get that. Afterwards, we moved on to accessible websites, and we began the process with Laura Bangford right before, and she was a consultant before she came on staff, on how do we get the at-large website to be web accessible. And then she had she began to start working on that. And that was when the first request was made for an accessibility tester to come on board, and while the website was being written, to make sure that it would be accessible. And if you were looking back at some of the older documents, in 2014, in December, there was an RFP issued looking for accessibility testers. And so that's sort of looking at the documentation of how I sort of pieced together these early initiatives. Another of the issues we're talking about moved on accessible videos. We have many discussions with different staff on how do we improve the accessibility of videos? At that time, they weren't captioning. And so there was no text. How do we it's another awareness store, trying to educate people of how to get videos captioned, whether by uploading them to YouTube and having them self-captioned, whether if there's scripts of these videos that were shot, they can be uploaded. The same way that we wouldn't just have an English language video, we would have it in Spanish, French, and other different languages to work and engage with other populations. We were the same way of having it in different language, having it having the English subtitles. And we looked at several different technology tools that can do that. Next slide, please. And I said Laura Bangford's staff worked on the at-large, making sure they followed the World Wide Web's Web Accessibility Initiative. And then she also recruited a small team of volunteers to work with the vendor on this. Next slide. The next effort is the captioning. And since this required funding in outside area, we began the process of looking at the additional budget process of how do we procure the necessary funding. So we began with the early working on the additional budget requests to show to get money, and we started small with English captioning, and that's how we had the captioning pilot. And we began the pilot back in fiscal year 16, which is in 2015 on that. And we did it in order to showcase the benefits of it. We didn't only work with at large. At that time, the work stream 2 was in full blast. And so we wanted to make sure that when we were going through the board and getting more notice of the constituencies to support us in this, we used some of our hours that were donated in our captioning pilot to those groups. So we first went to some of the other cross community, the internet governance, and then we went to the workstream 2 groups. So we reached out to the leaders of these groups and to seek their permission to have a captioner come. Next slide, please. And so that's where we work with them, and some of these constituencies found the benefits so immediate that they went out and procured their own funding for captioning. So prior to us having captioning at workstream 2 meetings, they never had captioning. Immediately after the first time of having it, they saw the benefits and worked to procure funding to caption all their meetings. And as I said, we went to looking at the videos and learning platforms, and we had many discussions with the ICANN org staff. Originally, both from, I think it was Nora Arabicito's team, other teams working with ICANN Learn staff to try to get the videos captioned and try to make sure that all the videos that were up there could actually be used by people with screen readers, because on many sites, not ICANN alone, there were problems that people who were blind or low vision could not take any of these classes. This was true not only of ICANN, this was true of ISOC and other groups. And so we wanted to avoid that. And so we worked closely with them that we couldn't get them. And we did, and so we trained them and we made them aware of this and how much of a priority it was. And so when they were so the new videos that they would be put up on the site, they would be captioned. All the older ones, they would have to wait till they moved to a new platform. But we were working closely with all the ICANN org staff to get them to increase their awareness and to get them to see the priorities and see the importance of this. So we work to teach them on best practices, how to do captioning, if they have a script, how to upload the script, what are the tools they need, how to use other different methods of working with audio and seeing and getting the audio channels, and so people could be they could be captioned. It took several years, but after finally, the ICANN Learn platform is accessible. But it just was a long process, and as Heidi and others know, that we had many meetings every time on these subjects. So it was, you just have to keep making people aware of these. Next slide. We also work closely with Josh Spouts and Sarah Kaplis' team, working to try to make the applications, the meeting applications, all types of applications accessible. We had several meetings with Josh. He then informed his vendors that this is what they want, and they want to make sure that they are accessible. We work with Sarah, and then after Josh, we work with Sarah's team. So we made this a priority earlier on, that when you go looking at new software, one of the first things you need to do is this accessible? And making sure that the vendors do, because many of these things are accessible, but vendors don't do it, or they didn't realize it was a priority. And so it's a lot of the effort is on awareness of making this a priority. Next slide. And as I talked about this a bit earlier, it was a major accessibility. One of the work streams within work stream 2 was the diversity subgroup, and accessibility was a major theme topic of that. And that occurred during the 2017-2018 timeframe. Numerous reports and meetings were held, but many of these recommendations are still not acted upon. And within the at-large operations planning budget team, we are now we've been the last several months going through a ranking exercise of what are the priorities of these recommendations that still haven't been acted upon, and what does at-large see as a main priority. And under Cheryl's leadership in this subgroup, we've been working diligently across all the reviews and ranking our priorities. And accessibility was one of the earlier ones, because workstream 2 was one of the early ones that still haven't all been implemented. But we always welcome new people along in the process. Next slide, please. So, and these are next few slides are some of the, I say, major challenges. One of the major challenges is there is no one in ICANN.org who has as their job requirements accessibility concerns. It's always sort of an afterthought. And ICANN is not alone in this. There are many organizations that were fighting the same battle. We hope to change this and make sure there's awareness of importance of these issues. But one of the first steps is this needs to be part of the job responsibilities. Not just, okay, well, in a vendor, let's do this. In software, let's do this. But as part of their performance and valuation, accessibility should be part of their concerns. We have many people in our team here in NARALO who actually, some of them do that in their day job. And they also say how tough it is in doing it. And the only way to ensure that we have accessibility criteria involved is to have this as a job performance, and we don't have that. We also are advocating that staff at ICANN.org need to hire people with disabilities. They need to hire people who are blind, or recruit those, or do promotional efforts to recruit those, to try to make that will help within the org to make sure that these accessibility issues that we're talking about become successful. Otherwise, we're continually asking volunteers to test different improvements to ICANN sites, because oftentimes things are rolled out and they're not tested. They don't have an accessibility tester. They didn't go like on websites. They didn't, like we did with the website, they didn't go and hire accessibility testers. They don't have accessibility audits that are being done continually on the sites and seeing what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. And so they rely on us as volunteers to tell them when something's broken. But that should not be the case. They should have, if they had someone with accessibility as their main priority, then that would not get done. Because if it didn't get done, then they would be judged on that in their performance review and would get points off if they didn't meet these goals. Next slide, please. Okay, some examples, what we happened, which were quickly fixed, but they should not have been there to begin with, was when ICANN went to single sign-on, the platform that was used was not accessible. And people with screen readers had trouble finding the site, using the site. And this happened right before Atlas 3, I think Atlas 3. And so we had a lot of volunteers then, and that was noticed early on. And then they troubleshooted it with the ICANN org staff team, and they found a solution. And now the site is a lot more accessible. But if ICANN was hiring accessibility testers and doing orders regularly, these issues would not have come up. And so they shouldn't be coming up. And it should require volunteers who are wanting to get engaged in ICANN, and testing is to find problems. They should be automatically found through different accessibility orders that happen, once or twice a year. Next slide, please. This is one of my major problems, and I filed both with at-large filed, and also independent filed public comments, where staff who are writing the documents are not trained on the importance of using alt tags for images, text, tables, material. So while we see a text, like we see this document on the screen, one is people with screen readers cannot see it. As Belen said, it should be accessibility by design. They should know that right now, all the software that's out there, Word, Excel, any of the social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, they all allow for easy putting of alt tags. Alt tags are like if there's a graph or an image that you're using in a Word document, others, they cannot be seen by people with screen readers. So if you right-click on it, you edit the alt text, and the alt text will say, like for instance here, I would edit and I would say decorative background, because it's not really adding anything to the text by the circle, the orange circle, and the gray. So it's more decorative. So you would say decorative background. But like when we open the slide and I had the NARALO logo, I would say on the alt tag, NARALO logo. And so then someone reading the screen reader will say, okay, it's a logo. That's what it is. Or it's a graph. Or what does this table represent? Oftentimes people are also, and I've commented on in public comments, they are putting pictures instead of inserting a table. They're doing a snapshot of the picture and inputting it as an image. The image doesn't come up as anything for people with screen readers. They just see this sign says image, image. One, if you had copied and pasted the table as a table, then the software could read it and tell them what it was. Or if you were describing it, like we have here, looking at the Zoom page here, we could be saying, oh, this is the Zoom, and she has it in gallery view with the different people's photos or pictures or names on the right-hand side. Just simple descriptions of all the documents and text. And today's software allows for easy tagging of these and adding in these. And it just means the staff should need to be trained, volunteers need to be trained, as we have done, on how to do this. But as paid staff are part of ICANN, they do need is up to ICANN to train them and to make sure that all documents are correctly produced. As I mentioned, the at-large has filed comments, public comments about these documents for the budget and other documents. And we hope to have these issues resolved. But again, it should not be up to the volunteers. They should hire either a company or someone to review documents. They should conduct awareness training, make sure people know how to do alt tags, make sure people know how to copy images, how to do these things. Staff can go to training to make sure that they know that. Greg has also, and others, and Jonathan Zook has also talked about the issue of documents for cognitive disabilities. Don't make them too busy. For color blindness, what kind of colors contrasts are you using? What kind of fonts are you using? Which fonts are better than that? Jonathan, in his class, gave a series of tips on that. Next slide, please. We are still fighting the captioning battle, even though the benefits have been proven. Yet again, we have made it into the core, but we could be kicked out of the core. Last time, once we made it into the core, but then got kicked out because there was no money. We're back in the core, but we can get kicked out at any moment because ICANN decides, oh, we don't have money for this. We finally, after 5 years, finally got approved for captioning in French and Spanish. But as of today, there is no sign language options. We have never succeeded in having ICANN.org staff appoint or identify accessibility champions. That was some of our original requests when the committee was formed in 2014. And as I mentioned, so our staff are not trained on proper formatting for documents and the importance of tools to ensure accessibility. Next slide. We need to build a culture of accessibility. Not in at large, we're building this, but nothing else, nothing's happening in any other constituencies because there's no one advocating for it. There's no one pushing for accessibility. If I wasn't pushing for it all the time, we wouldn't have these things. I haven't found a published ICANN policy on web accessibility or other accessibility best practices. It's not saying it doesn't exist, it's that I haven't seen it. We haven't seen any encouragement of registries to use the best practice guide in relation to registrars and having registrants use the World Wide Web, web content accessibility guidelines when developing websites. Next slide, please. These were some of the original, when I did my research back in 2014 of what we were talking about in the notes that's on the wiki. I found a lot of this information, and still we really haven't proceeded on that because we decided to prioritize the captioning in the other areas, but nothing else has been done because we haven't been beating the horse on this. When Zoom first came out, like as I talking about, training and awareness are key. When we switched to Zoom, people were not used to it, and also people with accessibility could not see what was being shared. So we had to train the staff and saying, okay, well, you need to add this to the agenda, the presentation, the agenda, share a link in the chat to the agenda, share something of how the people with screen readers look at what we're seeing, because they can't see what's on the screen because their screen reader cannot read someone else's computer. It only reads their computer. And so staff needed to be trained on how to deal with this. So when someone puts up a slide, say, okay, well, it's linked to the agenda, or it is on here's a link to the slide presentation, or this is what's happening. And that's what helpful links like the agenda all took training of staff. Because prior to this, staff were not trained. It continued other constituencies, because we have not trained those staff. they struggle when with people with disabilities because the slides are not linked to the agenda. And it should be these procedures should be done throughout ICANN.org. It should not be just our group doing it because it's a universal best practice or other groups doing it. It should be viewed by anyone, as Greg was saying, universal by design. And then hopping again, staff need to train how to create accessible documents. Next slide. You know, as I said, it's not that staff are not interested in making these improvements. They are, or solving problems, because they are. Whenever we bring something up to staff, they're always looking at how can we solve the issue. But it shouldn't be the volunteer's responsibility to solve it. It should be ICANN.org's. And the reason why these things keep coming up goes back to there is no one on staff where accessibility is part of their job responsibility. Until we have that, we are continually going to have these problems. It was only by our constant pressing of the importance of universal by design, of captioning, of accessibility issues, that ICANN learned when they went to a new platform, look for an accessible platform. But that took huge effort. And I know staff knew that I kept harping on this year after year, meeting after meeting on these issues. And we'll continue to harp on it. Next slide, please. Now, here's my warning sign issue. I think it's great that Zoom has rolled out automated captioning. It's great, but as we've seen at certain ICANN meetings, human captioning is so much better. It's 100% better. It's still preferred. My fear is they'll say, oh, we can give you AI captioning. We don't need to spend money on human captioning, which is more expensive. And that is my greatest fear on these things, that we need to keep harping on them. We need to say money has to be spent on captioning, human captioning. Right now, the automated captioning is only doing English. They are not doing French, Spanish, all the other languages. Just like we have interpreters, we pay lots of money for interpreters. At Large is one of the unique bureaus with constituencies within ICANN, is they pay for interpreters. We value that as a huge priority, and we put our money down. Why are we putting our money in insisting on captioning? And why do we have to take, and I can never understand why, even though we have money to spend on captioning, we can't spend it during the ICANN meeting, because that's off grounds. I've never understood that. And I still don't understand that. Captioning should be available in all languages and at all times during the ICANN meetings. ICANN meetings, before ICANN meetings, other times, it should be there. So that's why I thought it's the warning signs. These are like, okay, we don't want to lose momentum. We had to push for human captioning. If we go back to we're slipping backwards. Next slide. I think that might be it. Yeah, no, and as I mentioned, Greg Shatton has given sessions on accessible documents, color contrast. I know Jonathan Jerk has given several presentations. We can keep giving these presentations, but and at Large, we'll keep working on this, but it needs to go to the other constituencies as well. And for that, you need an accessibility as in going through on the chat. Next slide. And so that comes to the end. I would love to take questions, comments, suggestions. As you see here, we have the NARALO logo. And if you had the PDF or the PowerPoint, it would say on the alt tag, NARALO logo. I didn't describe the logo because, you know, I could have said, the logo has colors for all the 5 regions of ICANN. But that was it. So let's just stop the screen share so that we can see everyone can see more people going forward. And I would love to have questions by anyone on this. Oh, me? Oh, okay. I think it does, but it hasn't been. And I think that's one of the recommendations that were in the work stream 2. And maybe others, Cheryl and others who remember more, or Greg remembers more of that, that was something that was put in work stream 2. But I see Jonathan and Greg have the hand up. So let's go to Jonathan first.
Hi, I'll turn my camera on. So, hi, Judith. How are you? I'm glad that you and Cheryl and others and Glenn have played a leadership role in making this a highly visible thing inside of ICANN. And there's definitely a lot of work left to be done. I want to say something unpopular, which is that I feel like the way that things landed with ICANN Learn is such that accessibility is achieved through a kind of least common denominator approach to course design. And so it's unfortunate because if we think about the best way to design a course for a screen reader, that's probably not the best way pedagogically to design a course for a human being. And so the question then becomes, how do I split the difference between those things, and coming up with it, instead of just referring people to the W3C initiatives, we might, as you said, come up with a document for ICANN that kind of talks about what some of these 80% solutions are, or something like that. Because I know, for example, I'm dyslexic. So having a course that's predominantly just paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of text makes it less accessible to me. Right, and so I don't normally identify as disabled, but at the same time, the way that people learn, et cetera, is not necessarily in alignment with how a machine reader, a machine screen reader is interpreting materials. And so finding some way to get things as good as they can be, and then create add-ons, like creating a video and creating captions is a perfect example. But one of the things you could do for accessibility is actually embed into the audio of the video descriptions of what was in the video. Right. And I think we would all recognize that that would make the video viewing experience degraded for those that were just trying to watch the video. And so captions provide a kind of a compromise that allow people to have something that's happening in parallel or something. And so I don't have all the answers. I just wanted to lodge that as an ongoing concern of mine, because I feel like the ICANN Learn platform is a very critical part of the organization going forward. And yet I feel like the adherence to ADA means that we're ignoring 50 years of what we've learned about how people learn, in order to make it more accessible to a screen reader. And I think that's a complexity.
Well, yeah. So thank you so much, Jonathan, without that. But what they also have is they have what's on, at movie theaters and others, where there's a third audio channel where you could turn off if you wanted to, you could turn off the audio channel that tells you descriptions. They're all separate audio feeds. That's what it's called open captioning. Open captioning is you can turn it off and on, open audio off and on. You don't have to be seeing it. So, but it is for then the people who need it, they turn it on and they listen to it. but maybe Greg could answer more of these questions. So as he does this also for a living. Greg?
Thanks. It's Greg Shatton for the record. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. A couple of things. First, I do want to say that ICANN has made great strides over the years I've been around and watched it. It's not a straight line process. It never is. But there has been a lot of progress and a lot of desire. Obviously, there's limited staff, limited funds, and the like. But nonetheless, and I think this is all meant as history and constructive criticism, and not as some sort of weepy sort of grievance. And I don't think Judith put it that way either. I think it was a very positive presentation. I think that with regard to what Jonathan is saying, Jonathan, I'd like to take this up with you offline, because I don't know the exact particulars of where you think the friction is between the two goals, but I will say that it is a common misconception, especially in the website accessibility space, that an accessible website is somehow going to be compromised from an aesthetics or from a usability standpoint for people without disabilities. And that's far less true than most people say it is. And in fact, a number of the best practices that relate to accessibility are actually good for every user. Obviously, we have discussed how captions are good for a lot of people. But another point is that proper structure in terms of levels of headings is incredibly important for a screen reader, because a screen reader has to kind of follow the roadmap of the document. And if it's just slapped together without any attention being paid to headings, or headings are out of order because people aesthetically wanted them to look differently, that sort of thing should be both good for the person with disabilities using a screen reader, and for everyone else.
And I'd love to respond if I could to that, because I'm aware of all those things and have done a bunch of research about this because it's been frustrating. And I will say that ADA, unfortunately, is different than the W3C guidelines, and contains a lot of conflicting recommendations associated with online guidelines for accessibility. And there's a reason I spoke specifically about the courses and not websites generally, because the net result is that the courses on ICANN Learn predominantly look like textbooks from the 70s. And you have one of the most sophisticated learning platforms in existence on the market, and it's being used to create a textbook. And I feel like there's got to be another way, and I don't know what that way is in the context of the underlying learning system. But I feel like we also need to be finding a way to push the boundaries a little bit more in ICANN Learn, while maintaining a level of accessibility that makes them approachable to everyone.
I would like to explore that too, again, offline, because that shouldn't be necessary, or shouldn't be as necessary. It shouldn't be forced to turn things into textbooks, because that's also not good. One of the things to remember about the W3C guidelines is that they are not implementation ready. They are really kind of technical success criteria. There is a whole lot of secondary writing and learning about how to work with the guidelines, and there really shouldn't be significant conflicts between ADA guidelines and W3C guidelines properly implemented. It's something that has to be explored, and it's one of the shortcomings, frankly, of the W3C guidelines, is that people think, oh, you can hand that to a developer and it's going to work, or you can hand it to a person of reasonable intelligence and they're going to make it work. It doesn't tell you how to make it work, and even those people who do this for a living, and I'm talking about the technical side, are constantly in touch with each other on listservs and bulletin boards and even Twitter, saying, I have this thing happening to me. Anybody dealt with this before? This is all brave, not brave new world stuff. It's new world stuff, edge level stuff that is going on here. So again, it's kind of a constant iterative exercise. One should never be satisfied when one should be satisfied, and one should certainly not be satisfied when one is dissatisfied. There's always something going on out there, and there are definitely solutions out there that that want to present things that are good for everybody. As a rising tide raises all boats, and as Jonathan mentioned, there are many people here who are, if you will, disabled or have disabilities who you don't see that they do. I mean, virtually anybody over the age of 60 is starting to lose something. Just, whether it's their hair or their waistline, it could also be their eyesight or their hearing. So those are we're heading into a generation of ICANN veterans who are all going to be experiencing, not all, many who will be experiencing issues. So we have to be cognizant of that, and it's not just for those who are significantly disabled or for whom that is part of it. The last thing I'll say is that we do need to recruit not just to ICANN.org individuals with disabilities, but that we need to continue to recruit to at large and to other organizations more people with disabilities, and then that requires some outreach on our part. And maybe there is an organization that isn't quite, that we haven't really made contact with, it where we could open up some not floodgates, but at least some more flow into our community from the disabled community. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, so thanks so much, Greg Shatton, Judith Helston, for the record. I will call, Greg, did you or Alan want to talk about the workstream 2 diversity and the accessibility recommendations there?
That's not what I was going to talk about.
Okay, maybe Greg, do you, oh, maybe Leon has those, but anyway, Alan, first I'll go to you. Alan?
Yeah, sorry, takes a while to hit all the buttons.
Okay.
As someone who's over 70 and has lost hair, sight, and some sound, I can appreciate all of these needs. I guess I was, Jonathan started off saying I'm going to say something unpopular, and I'm going to say something unpopular too. Part of it is what Jonathan was saying, that we have to be careful as we're addressing the needs of people with very significant disabilities, that we don't lower the level of our overall services we provide. As important as it is to address disabilities, it's important that we keep on doing our regular job. And Jonathan's comments on ICANN Learn, I think, are in that area, that we're not serving anyone well by writing really good textbooks on ICANN Learn. That's not what we're supposed to be using that facilities for. And it goes to some of the comments that Judith was making at the end of her talk also about whether we should have live captioning versus computer captioning, whether we can provide captioning for all the languages. We're going to increasingly be in a money constrained environment. At large spends an awful lot of time looking at reducing domain name abuse. One of the impacts, if we were successful, of stopping all registrations that are used for bad purposes, we would significantly impact ICANN's revenue stream. So it's an interesting world we're living in, and I think we're going to have to balance all of these things because there just are no absolutes. And we're not going to get everything we want in any part of our life, and certainly in any part of ICANN life. And we just have to keep on fighting to make sure that what we're doing is in the right direction. As I think Greg said, we're looking for awareness. That doesn't always mean we address all the problems, but we have to at least be cognizant of the fact that we're not addressing them and know how we're making the conscious decisions, because there are going to be continual conscious decisions made as we try to find a balance between all the various needs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alan. It's Judith Helsing for the record. Leon.
Thank you, Judith. I'm sorry for the background noise. I'm in a somewhat noisy place, so I I ask you to forgive me for that. But I just wanted to make a reflection that disabilities is just one more marker of the inclusiveness framework that we should strive for within ICANN. So yes, I completely agree that there should be someone championing accessibility for the people who have special needs and that otherwise wouldn't be able to access the information and the meetings that we carry out on a global scale. So as I posted in the chat, I'm pretty sure that both the stakeholder engagement team and the communications team are aware of how accessibility impacts this engagement and how important it is to the organization and to the whole community as I was saying, strive towards the inclusiveness that we all strive for. So I just wanted to say this, that let's not say accessibility is the only thing that we should be looking for. No, it's a very important part, but it's just another marker of what inclusiveness means in terms of the diversity that we should be striving to have within ICANN. So as usual, you've seen how I've supported and pushed for budget submissions, et cetera, on this end, and I'm happy to continue to do so. And as I said, I find it immensely useful, at least personally, to have the captioning tool. For those of us who are not native speakers, it is very important and very useful to have this tool because it allows us to match what we are hearing with what we're reading, and many times it helps us better understand how the discussion and the different positions are going. So just a thought, and yes, we should be definitely pushing for some champion within the organization, but also within the community. I think it's everyone's job and everyone's concern to strive for this inclusivity and to try to help those with special needs access the information and the tools and the meetings that we carry out. So thank you for that, Judith.
It's Judith Helsing for record. Thanks so much, Leon, for that. Greatly appreciate it. And I see we are at the top of the hour, but if anyone, Alan, your hand is still up. Is that a new hand, old hand? Okay, old hand. Okay. Yes, and Eduardo, that's true about the YouTube. It's Judith Helsing for the record. But again, it's automated, it's not human. And it is, and sometimes the automated in different languages is not good. Sometimes it is. It is all what they get. That's what they're collecting all the data from people when they're reading that, is they're trying to improve these transcription robots. And then Michelle posted a survey on the link, and maybe we will also, Eduardo, you'll be sending out you'll get staff to send out the survey to everyone who are on the call. Okay, bye all.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much,
Bye all.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.